we now return to the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles. The Old Bailey. This place always makes me feel strange. I seem to get chills down my spine and break out in a nervous sweat all at the same time. Well, I didn't think I'd be back here so soon. It's my line. Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Natsume. It was only 2 days ago that I was declared not guilty here. Yes, we somehow managed to prove he didn't stab Miss Green in the back. But now this, another morning, another murder, and here I am again in this hellhole. Can't keep coming to court. I'm beginning to think he's right. It really does seem as though he's cursed. Mr. Naruhodo, I'm afraid I have bad news. Oh. Mr. Natsume, good morning. Yes, morning. So, here we are again. Yes, again. Judicial Assistant Miss Mikotowa Esquires, what's the bad news? Oh dear, you heard, did you? If you come in shouting at the top of your voice, people can't help hearing what you say. Oh, I am sorry. You've done nothing wrong, Mrs. Sato. Now, what is it? Well, it seems that the prosecution in today's trial will be led by Lord Barock Van Zeeks. Van Zeeks? Ah, oh no, no. The so-called Reaper of the Bailey, most legendary prosecutor in the land. In the trial 2 days ago, he pursued Soseki-san and I relentlessly. Of course, by the skin of our teeth, we managed to pull through, but still. Perhaps Mr. Natsume's acquittal in the last trial wasn't the end of the matter, after all. Yes, I know what you're thinking. The legend of the Reaper that says, nothing can save a person in the dock when Lord Van Zeeks is the prosecutor. Oh no. That even if that person is found not guilty, the accused will meet a mysterious end one way or another. And we've experienced it firsthand. A man we successfully defended met the most terrifying end after his acquittal, right here in the Old Bailey. Do I have to put up with those ice-cold eyes boring into my soul again? Cursed by evil spirits and now by the Reaper. Pair of petrifying perils potentially. Well, if it's potentially, at least you appear to have hope, Mr. Natsume. Locum student Mr. Naruhodo Esquire. Yes? I'm innocent. You have to believe me. You more than anyone now. Don't worry. I'll be your steadfast ally every step of the way in this battle, I promise. And this promises to be a hard battle, I fear. Well, the trial is scheduled to begin shortly. We should move into the courtroom. Let's go. Oh yes, I forgot to say. I'm afraid he won't be able to make it. Mr. Sholmes, I mean. That's probably for the best. Oh, if he were here, I might be tempted to rely on his help. And that could be seen as a weakness. If Lord Van Zeeks were to notice, he'd prey on it mercilessly. At least that's my gut feeling. Mr. Naruhodo. You're right. Yes, you're so right. Oh, well said, locum student Mr. Naruhodo Esquire. Well said. I swear on this sword at my side and on the spirit of Kazuma that it harbors. I'll show him what a Japanese lawyer can do. I'll set you free, with honor. Oh, yes. Again? So he retired, came out of retirement for the last game, and then didn't he go back into retirement again, supposedly, at the end of the game? In the name of Her Majesty the Queen, I hereby declare this court to be in session. I now call upon the counsels for the prosecution and defense to declare their willingness to proceed. The prosecution is ready. The defense is ready, my lord. Readiness for the trial, my learned Nipponese friend, is not what the defense needs. What you need is readiness for your inevitable defeat. It's not just in my imagination, it's really there. Lord Van Zeeks has such an animosity towards us Japanese for some reason. It was some time ago that he first became known as the Reaper of the Bailey, I believe. These past few years he hasn't appeared in court at all. Yet now he's back in the courtroom, though for some reason only when I'm defending. This Reaper, with his curious disdain for us Japanese, is a prosecutor shrouded in mystery. Still, this isn't the time to be pondering that. I have to concentrate on Saseki-san's trial.
Furthermore, I now call upon the 6 ladies and gentlemen of the jury. You have been chosen at random to represent the will of the people in this trial. Are you ready to fulfill your duty?
Absolutely. I've gone Australian also. I had a feeling this larrikin wasn't innocent before.
It's the same people. I must say that I feel especially ruthless on days when my hat refuses to sit right. Oh, well, I rather like how you're wearing your hat. I think the ruthless look is very fetching, actually. This is someone new. I need to be somewhere at 10 o'clock. I have a very important meeting. Let's make this quick.
Oh, couldn't agree more. I need to take home 5 bob tonight, or the missus will go through the roof.
Oh, may the Lord show us all the light here and lead his flock to a righteous verdict. I don't remember most of the voices.
British jury system is so different to our own, isn't it? It's quite extraordinary to think that the power of judgment is in the hands of 6 members of the public as opposed to 3 in Japan. And that the judge can only pass sentence when all jurors are in agreement about the defendant's guilt. 6 citizens of London chosen at random, or at least that's the idea. The prosecution will draw attention to the fact that the accused was on trial here but 2 days ago. Accordingly, where possible, the same jurors have been asked to return for duty today.
Very well, let us commence the trial. Lord Van Zeeks, your opening statement, please.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it is not the intent of the prosecution to cast doubt over your past decision. However, the innocent verdict afforded to this eccentric Nipponese before has had dire consequences for the 2nd time in the series. Did the accused repent for his wrongdoing in that affair? Far from it. Instead, he used his freedom to perpetrate the most blood-curdling crime, namely that the attempted murder of his neighboring lodger, an innocent Englishman. To explain the circumstances of the crime, the prosecution calls its first witnesses to the stand. The detective responsible for investigating the scene, the accused himself. And the accused himself. Right. Witnesses, your names and occupations, please.
Yes, sir. Tobias Gregson, Detective Inspector at Scotland Yard's Homicide Division.
Saseki Natsume of the Empire of Japan. My government ordered me to come here as a student to study your language and culture. Mr. Natsume, your voices are too similar, my lord, sir. I'm quite sure I'm not mistaken, that you swore an oath never to set foot in my courtroom again. I remember it as if it were yesterday.
The day before, in fact, my lord, but close enough.
Believe me, this is the last place I want to be.
Inspector, let's hear from you first. Explain the case for the court. Right you are, sir. The incident occurred at the Garadeb household where the defendant was has lodgings. I can read. In the ground floor room of the victim, Mr. William Shamspeare. The defendant has already admitted to visiting the victim on the night in question. Mr. Shamspeare collapsed in his room as a result of poisoning by strychnine. He was found the following morning when the landlord, suspecting something was wrong, broke down the door.
This means, I presume, that the door to the victim's room was locked at the time of the incident.
Correct, my lord. It was locked from the inside, making entry to or exit from the room impossible. Although the victim, Mr. Shamspeare, lives to tell the tale, he very nearly didn't. The man was halfway to heaven when we first found him. I was the first officer on the scene, my lord. And I have a photographic print here that I took at the time to show how it looked.
Yes, a chilling scene indeed. The man looks very much deceased.
That's right. Everyone present believed that's exactly what he was. There's a gas puddle on the floor there.
Very well. I shall accept this photographic print as evidence for the court.
Crime scene has been entered into the court record.
Now then, Mr. Natsume. Yes. As the defendant, do you have anything to say at this juncture? They're haunted. Haunted by evil spirits. Good gracious, what's haunted? My lodgings. There's been a whole series of strange happenings in my lodgings. The tenant before me died in mysterious circumstances. A woman was stabbed by no one on the street outside. My neighbor was poisoned. And me. What about me? I've nearly been killed countless times. Killed, Mr. Natsume? How? Even on that fateful night it happened, when I returned from Mr. Shamspeare's room. I lit my gas stove and climbed into bed, but before long, the stove went out, and somebody tried to kill me. You must always extinguish all fires before retiring for the night, Mr. Natsume. But it's so cold, my runny nose would freeze. The point is, I didn't poison my neighbor. Now why am I being accused of this? Why is my existence so cursed? Thank you, witnesses. I believe I have reasonably clear picture of events.
If I could raise one more point, my lord. One more. Conclusive point.
Conclusive? Go on.
Fortunately, the victim, Mr. Shamspeare, has regained consciousness after his ordeal. And he has named the true culprit. The poison consumed by the victim was administered in a cup of tea that he drank on the night in question. Tea, my lord, that was brought to the victim's room by the accused.
The accused? Good grief. Order.
Yes, that's the crux of this whole case. If Soseki-san is innocent, then why has the victim accused him?
Well, Mr. Natsume, what have you to say to this accusation? That evening, yes, I did take some freshly brewed tea with me when I visited Mr. Shamspeare's room as a gift. The public water pump outside always freezes at night, so I bought bottled water especially to make it.
Let's take a moment. And not that one. See, there's that right there. That's kind of a big deal.
And this is the result. Never will I touch tea again. Never.
The public pump was frozen, you say? That's not information we've heard before.
That will do, thank you. Now, according to our laws, the defense must have the opportunity to cross-examine witnesses at once. Therefore, I call upon these witnesses now for a formal testimony. I presume the prosecution has no objection.
None whatsoever, my lord.
Good. Then you'll give your account of events on the night in question to the court now. Yes, my lord. It was around 9 o'clock that evening when I visited my neighbor and I took some tea with me as a gift. We had a heated literary debate over a nice hot drink, after which I went back to my room at around 11. My tea was completely harmless. He couldn't have locked the door behind me otherwise, could he?
Strychnine takes some time to have an effect on the body. People don't kill over immediately after taking it. The victim would have been perfectly able to lock the door after his guest left. The argument still stands.
Yes, I see. It all seems relatively straightforward.
Excuse me, but that testimony does raise one rather crucial point, I think. Mr. Natsume claims his tea to have been harmless. Presumably, though, the teacups have been examined for traces of the poison, haven't they? Why didn't I think of that? Well, as it happens, no. We haven't been able to.
Did I hear you correctly, Inspector? Scotland Yard has failed to examine the suspect's substance.
How could you have overlooked something so important? Isn't that the first thing you should have done?
My learned Nipponese friend is falsely incensed.
The inspector said Scotland Yard
Was unable to examine the tea, not that it was overlooked.
unable. Why? It's simple enough. There was none left. Not a drop. Someone must have been very thirsty indeed.
With current scientific techniques, it's not possible to test for poison under such circumstances.
Well, I'm gonna
suggest that's not true.
We need only a drop, but that one drop does actually have to exist, funnily enough.
The lack of examination notwithstanding, it appears nothing other than the tea passed the victim's lips on the night in question.
I see. Thank you. The matter is clear.
Cast your eyes over the jury, my learned friend.
What?
You can see it in their faces, I'm sure. The recognition of the accused's guilt. Your client's fate is all but sealed. In mere moments from now, you will lose, and your compatriot will be damned for all eternity.
He's right. I can feel all 6 of the jurors looking daggers at me. But I can't let them beat me down. I won't.
Counsel for the defense, proceed with your cross-examination.
Yes, my lord.
It's around 9 in the evening when I was in my neighbor and dumped some tea when I had a gift.
Were you and your neighbor good friends then?
No, we weren't friends. Not at all. Not at all. Never, ever.
Simple no would have sufficed. Then, why did you decide to pay him a visit?
Mr. Shamspeare fancies himself as having great literary knowledge. As a fellow scholar of English literature, we find much to talk about together.
Come now. No Nipponese could understand the finer point of English literature.
And on the night in question, that was the topic of conversation as well, I presume.
It was the day of my last trial when I was acquitted. I just arrived back at my lodgings when I ran into Mr. Shamspeare outside on the street. That was around 6 o'clock. We exchanged 1 or 2 pleasantries, but it soon turned into a heated discussion. He was on his way out at the time, though, so I promised to visit his room that evening at 9 to continue our debate. But did I have ill intentions? No, not one, not 2, not any. Not at all. Never, ever.
Simple no would have sufficed, I feel.
Then tell the cause what happened when you visited the victim's room.
We had a heated debate over a nice hot drink.
Hold it!
A literary debate about Shakespeare's works, I think you said, did you?
Shakespeare? A very worthy topic of conversation, I must say. Oh, yes, my lord. Romeo and Juliet. Who was stronger? It was a profoundly pleasurable parley. Romeo and Juliet?
Who was stronger? I know I'm going to regret asking this, but how did the debate go?
Well, we both agreed that we could reach a conclusion more quickly with a reenactment. So we battled it out, in a Greco-Roman style, naturally.
What?
Mr. Shamspeare had all sorts of costumes in his room for just such a contest.
So when you say a reenactment, you mean you were actually in costume?
He was Romeo, and I was Juliet. And after a vigorous, wild tussle, I, as Juliet, came out on top, a victory I'll cherish forever. I dare not imagine the terrible scene of carnage.
The fact remains that it was you who prepared the tea and took it to the victim, correct?
I boiled the water in my room and made a pot to take with me. I heard that he was too poor to have tea himself, you see.
It's true, there was no sign of any tea leaves in the man's room.
I wanted to do something nice, to be friendly. So why is everyone looking at me with such suspicion? My tea was harmless, of course it was.
And do you have any basis for that statement, witness? Couldn't have locked the door behind him otherwise.
Hold it!
Yes, there was not a drop of tea left in the victim's room anywhere, was there? That's correct. Anyone would think the fellow had never had a pot of tea before. He must have licked it dry. Say that again? Which is a pity, because one drop is all we would have needed to analyze it for poison. And you say that you returned home to your room at 11 o'clock, Mr. Natsume?
Yes, definitely. By heaven and earth, I swear it.
The landlord was able to verify that, as it happens. He confirmed that the defendant went back to his room at 11 that night.
And how was the landlord able to attest to this?
He, said it was the lamps, I believe.
The lamps, Inspector?
When tenants return to their rooms and start using gas, the lamps in other parts of the house flicker. Yes, Mr. Garadeb seems to pay a lot of attention to the comings and goings of his tenants.
There's only one key to Mr. Shamspeare's room, I know that for certain. So he must have locked the door himself from inside his room.
The victim has confirmed that to be the case, yes.
So I'm right, my tea was harmless, completely harmless. If you take poison, you die. Everyone knows that.
It's not that simple, I'm afraid.
Oh, what do you mean?
Drinking takes some time to have an effect on the body. Won't kill over immediately. How long does it take for symptoms to appear, then? According to the coroner I was speaking to at the yard, about 30 minutes after the poison is consumed. Okay, well there's a discrepancy there because they started the conversation at 9 and he left at 11, so... And then the victim suffers violent convulsions, cramping, and stiffness and eventually dies from asphyxiation. So there's a 30-minute interval between when the poison is ingested and the onset of symptoms. There seem to be a lot of different types of poison in the world, that's for sure. Oh dear, death by poisoning again. It's always so awful. 30 minutes is a long time. Certainly long enough for the victim to have locked the door behind the accused after he left. Can't deny that. And it further degrades Soseki-san's alibi. I have the medical report from the doctor who examined the victim here, my lord. It spells it out, really. The accused is the only person who could have done it.
Very well. The court will add this report to the court record as evidence.
Let us look at it. Oh yes, I see it here. Delayed onset of symptoms. Cause of coma, ingestion of a small quantity of strychnine. Toxic effects present 30 minutes after ingestion. High likelihood of the substance having mixed with the tea the victim was drinking, but no sample could be obtained for testing. Poisoning incident occurred around 1 a.m. Aside from the victim's pocket watch that appears to have broken when the man collapsed. But he left at 11. Plus we got the teacups. Great. So the problem here, the victim would have been perfectly able to lock the door after his guest left. The argument still stands.
Hold it!
The argument still stands, you say? This is what Mr. Natsume has been saying, isn't it? The pair of them drank tea together that night, so there was no... So if there was poison in it, the victim wouldn't have been able to lock the door after the accused left later on.
Exactly. Me and my tea are innocent. Sweet and innocent, I tell you.
I'm afraid, sir, that doesn't follow. You see, strychnine is a slow-acting poison. In other words, it takes time for symptoms to appear.
So you could have left the room up to 30 minutes after the victim drank the tea. And as long as you did that, Mr. Shamspear could have locked the door after you'd gone.
But no. We drank the tea straight away. The battle over whether Romeo or Juliet was stronger, that came after the tea.
Do you have any evidence to support that statement?
In my great homeland, the Empire of Japan, we have a saying. Drink tea while it's hot.
Sure, a proverb will satisfy the prosecution.
I'm afraid there's no conclusive proof to support the defendant's assertion. On the contrary, there are sufficient grounds to infer his guilt in this matter. No.
That's the extent of their testimony, is it? If I could voice a personal opinion, Mr. Naruhodo? Of course, go ahead. Mr. Natsume is arguing for his innocence so adamantly and so persistently, yet Inspector Gregson just brushes what he says aside. It's really quite infuriating. I agree. So we need to find an inconsistency in what the inspector is saying, I think. I'm afraid so. As things stand, the jurors are sure to find Mr. Natsume guilty. As I see it, what we need to focus on is the poison and the tea. Let's listen carefully to the testimony again. Yes. Alright, we don't need to listen to you. Strychnine takes some time to have an effect on the body. People won't keel over immediately after taking it. The victim been perfectly capable of walking. Okay, well, this is the poison. The poison and the cup. I mean, how do I push on this, though? Where was the thing about... I forget what dialogue option it was for the, hey, you could check for poison. I'm really confused about this one. This is the one that had the thing on the back side of it, yeah? That's not there anymore. Oh. What is it, Mr. Naruhodo? It's a bar of soap. When we first found it, I could have sworn there was some sort of round disc in this depression just here, a reddish one. Yes, you're right. I remember it too. But now the depression is completely empty. Where could the disc have gone? So it melted or something, huh? Probably has nothing to do with it. That'll come later. I gotta admit, I'm not sure which one to push on, or why.
Hold it!
How long does it take for symptoms to appear? 30 minutes after the poison's consumed. Yeah, okay. I guess I can try presenting this back to him, because the time is what's not adding up.
Objection!
No, that's not it. It's not true.
What does this thing say? The victim's medical report? God damn it. This thing.
Objection!
The argument still stands, you say. I think not, Inspector. Come again? I think you'll find that you've overlooked a very significant chronological inconsistency here. What? What are you on about? According to this report, the victim must have consumed the poison at around 1:30 in the morning. And yet, the defendant, Mr. Natsume, left the victim's room at 11. Yes, that's right. There's more than 2 hours of missing time there. In other words, if there was poison in the tea that Mr. Natsume brought to the victim's room, how could the victim have fallen ill to it 2.5 hours after the defendant left?
The defense's argument is entirely reasonable. How do you respond, Lord Van Zeeks?
Pray forgive the discourtesy if my mind has wandered. I was considering what cuisine would be best complement the contents of my hallowed chalice this luncheon. How could it have happened, you ask? I do hate to shatter illusions, but my Nipponese friend appears to be chasing a phantom idea. Phantom? Is it so hard to imagine the victim drank his tea after the accused left, but he just said they drank it hot? For example, at this time the stated in the report, yes, at around 1:30. Mr. Natsume brought the tea with him to drink together with his neighbor. And in Japan there's a well-known saying, drink tea while it's hot.
Objection!
And in my country there's an even more apt saying. There's nothing more refreshing than cold tea. The point is, if there was such a long gap, there may be other ways to explain how the victim came to be poisoned, other possibilities.
What sort of possibilities, Counsel?
Well, for example, a man could have had another visitor. Another visitor. That's a very bold assertion, my learned friend, from someone who has nothing to substantiate it. Or the victim could have taken the poison of his own volition.
You suggest this may have been a suicide, Counsel?
Objection!
Mr. Shamspeare has categorically denied suicide. The idea can and must be discounted.
Objection!
But he could be lying.
Is something wrong, Lord Van Zeeks?
I was listening to the sound of the carriage pulling up outside the courtroom. Pray forgive the discourtesy. Carriage? What carriage? It would seem that the key player in this case has just arrived.
Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow. A poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Who, sir, are you? William Shamspeare, my lord. Alas, 'twas I, undone by these bitter events. I am the victim.
Ha? What's he doing here?
Excellent. The prosecution seeks to call this gentleman to the stand. He's already there, but okay, with this testimony, my learned friend's futile resistance will be utterly crushed.
You're calling him as a witness?
Very well, counsel. I grant your request with interest. I'm curious to discover what the court shall hear from the victim himself. Happy am I, Shamspeare, to regale thee with my tale of woe, my lord.
Your voice is going to kill me.
But I still have my own tale to tell, my own tale of worse woe. I can regale the court with the tale of my perfect innocence in perfect English. That will do, Mr. Natsume. Let the court now hear from the victim.
Of course, this is going to have to wait a minute. Alright, so that's Mr. Shamspeare. But who's the other man beside him? Yes, I feel sure that we've caught a glimpse of that man before.
State your names and occupations for the court, please, witnesses.
Can we just...
Nah, screw it. We'll go into this next time.